Hello, hello. Oh, hello. There I am. Okay, which way did this go? All right. Hello. Hello, hello. Welcome to the Beatles Trivia. Hope y'all are having a good week. We're on a hump day here. Midweek, midday. We are good to go, right? Ooh, I think my music is a little loud. Alexa, reduce volume, please. Better? Yeah. I don't, I don't want to drown myself out, you see. All right, let me just get this positioned where I would like it to be. All right, so welcome to Beatles Lunchtime Trivia. I'm Sharon Schultz, also known as the Bay Lady. I do a lot of tours around the Chesapeake Bay region of Maryland where I live. Great place, lots of cool things to see and do. Um, so that's how I get the name Bay Lady. But anyway, today we're doing Beatles trivia. Have a couple little side things like this that I wouldn't call virtual tours, but anyway. So Beatles trivia, I'm going to do something different today. I've got a new book, Beatles trivia book. We usually work with my card deck, but the trivia book gives extra information. They have the questions divided into sections as opposed to random, like the cards, Beatles Significa cards. Instead, though, as I said, they have chapters, and the chapter includes trivia questions, the answers, and then a bunch of fun facts. So I thought that would kind of be nice. Not only would maybe we will learn new information, new things, not only from the trivia but from the facts as well. And if I'm not mistaken, the facts section backs up the material in the trivia section, so it kind of expands on it. Okay, so chapter one is history and origins. So we will start with the trivia and we'll see how far we get as far as other chapters. Okay. Let's see. Let me first read the intro to this book. The Beatles dominated the international music scene for more than half of the 1960s, appealing to the youth and reflecting the social movements of the times. Their music has reached audiences of every generation for the past several decades. To help you connect or perhaps reconnect with the lives, music, and legacy of the band, this book covers interesting facts and highlights historical moments. The information and statistics in this book are up to date as of early 2021. Because the band's peak years have come and gone, the historical facts should remain mostly consistent, while the surviving two members continue to be musically active. The band has ceased any new activity in April 1970 and officially dissolved in 1975. The only exception was a collaboration on the Beatles anthology series in the mid 90s. Use this book to test your knowledge with a round of trivia on various topics and perhaps review or gain new knowledge along the way. Whether you consider yourself a diehard fan or are only faintly familiar with the Beatles, this book offers the opportunity to reinforce your knowledge of one of the most important bands in the history of popular music. Let's see how much you know about the Beatles. It says that really. Mhm. Chapter 1, History and Origins. In which British city was the Beatles initially formed? In which British city was the Beatles initially formed? Let me go to the answers here so I can answer for you. Okay. All right. The suggestions, the possible choices are: in which city the Beatles initially formed? Was it London, Liverpool, Manchester, or Glasgow? London, Liverpool, Manchester, Glasgow. And the answer is Liverpool. I think probably most of us knew that if we're familiar, right? Liverpool got put on the map because the Beatles came from there. What was the name of John Lennon's skiffle band that Paul McCartney joined in 1957, followed by George Harrison in 1958? Was it called the Quarrymen, Johnny and the Boys, Brit Band, or Buddy Holly and the Crickets? Again, what was the name of John Lennon's skiffle band that Paul McCartney joined in 1957 and George Harrison joined a year later? Was it the Quarrymen, Johnny and the Boys, Brit Band, or Buddy Holly and the Crickets? And the answer is the Quarrymen. All right, the Quarrymen. True or false? The Beatles were the most photographed subject of the 1960s. Okay. True or false? Anybody know? The Beatles were the most photographed subject of the 1960s. Anyone? True. That was true. Another true or false. The haircuts of the members of the band were iconic and caused their own worldwide sensation. Okay, true or false? The haircuts of the members of the band were iconic and caused their own worldwide sensation. Okay, so remember the Beatles, they'd be singing and go, whoop, in their hair. Okay. So, is that true or false? That's easy, right? That would be true. That is a truism, right? Okay. Next page. Okay. In which city in Germany was the host of the Beatles' periodic residences during their early years? Or was it Berlin, Hamburg, Frankfurt, or Leipzig? Berlin, Hamburg, Frankfurt, or Leipzig? Which city in Germany did the Beatles have their quote unquote a residency in their early years? Da, 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 da. Anybody? It was Hamburg. If you said Hamburg, you said it right. True or false? Only Paul McCartney and John Lennon contributed vocals to their albums. Now you know. True or false? Does it need repeating a second time? All right. Only Paul McCartney and John Lennon contributed vocals to their albums. Right? Let's see. That is false. Because we know George sang and so did Ringo. So, yeah, that was easy. Next, another true or false. They seem to do true and falses back to back in pairs of two. I'm seeing. Second true, true or false. The founding members of the Beatles were teenagers at the time the band was formed. The founding members of the Beatles were teenagers at the time the band was formed. Now, that leads me to question, okay, what band are you? Well, I guess it would have to be all four of them then. So it would have to be when they formed the Beatles, because I'm thinking of, Johnny and the Moondogs, the Quarrymen, etc., etc. But true or false? Founding members were teenagers. Let's find out. True, they were. They were teenagers. So it must have been the Quarrymen, because if they were teenagers, the oldest they could be would be 19. So, uh, based on their age span, Ringo and John then would have been 19. Paul would have been he would have been 18, and George would have been 17. And that is right, because when they went to Hamburg, George wasn't legal. He wasn't 18. I think that had some issues. But anyway, that's another story. Maybe we'll come across it in the fun facts. The Beatles' UK popularity notably started at which venue in Liverpool? Was it Eric's Club, the Concert Square, the Cavern Club, the Zanzibar Club? Again, when the Beatles were in the UK and they started becoming popular, at which venue were they playing in Liverpool? Was it Eric's Club, the Concert Square, the Cavern Club, or the Zanzibar Club? Anybody? Okay, and the answer would be the Cavern Club, of course, the Cavern Club. As their popularity grew, what nickname did the principal group of four Beatles acquire? As their popularity grew, what nickname did the four guys get? Was it the Fab Four, the Fantastic Four, the Four Horsemen, the Four Friends? I think we all know which one that is, right? Do I need to repeat it a second time? The Fab Four. I almost said it actually, when I was asking the question a second time. Here's another true and false. All of the Beatles could read sheet music. I'm going to say right now that is a big falsehood. All of the Beatles could read sheet music. None of the Beatles read sheet music. Let's see. What is the correct answer? Number 10. Yep, that's false. And they all couldn't read that. Second, true and false. The original lineup of the Beatles was four members. The original lineup of the Beatles was four members. True or false? Four members. The original lineup. Think about it. I'm going to say it was five members. Could have been three. I'm going to say five, because they had Stu Sutcliffe in there when they had Pete Best as drummer. Okay, 11 is the number question. The original lineup was four members. The answer's false. 12, the mass fanaticism and media frenzy provoked by the Beatles when they rose to international stardom in the 1960s is referred to as what? The mass fanaticism and media frenzy provoked by the Beatles when they rose to international stardom in the 1960s is referred to as what? Your choices are Beetle invasion, flying Beatles, Beatlemania, peace, love, Beatles. Okay, again, was it Beetle invasion, flying Beatles, Beatlemania, peace, love, Beatles? And the answer is Beatlemania. In what year did the Beatles arrive in America at JFK International Airport in New York? I know what year it was. Just off the top of my head. I know. That's weird. Why do I know? Okay. The choices 1960, 1964, 1966, and 1970. In what year did the Beatles arrive in America at JFK in New York? 1960, 64, 66, or 1970? Okay, let's find out. 1964 is the answer. True or false? The name The Beatles was inspired by the name of the band Billie Holly and the Crickets. Do you remember ever hearing that? The idea for the Beatles, the name, was inspired by Buddy Holly and the Crickets. True or false? And that is true. As a matter of fact, the legend goes on to say instead of using beetles, the insect spelling like crickets, they, use beat instead, kind of a pun on music and the beat. Very clever. True or false? The Beatles were all multi-instrumentalists. The Beatles were all multi-instrumentalists. I would say yes. Yeah. Think true or false? True. Let's see. 15. Yep, true. That was true. They are all multi-purpose musicians. Which studio in London hosted the most recordings created by the Beatles? Which studio in London hosted the most recordings created by the Beatles? Was it Britannia Rose Studios, Trident Studios, Abbey Road Studios, or RGM Sound? Hang on. Okay, okay, that tells you. Which studio in London did the Beatles record mostly at? Most of their recordings at this studio in London. Was it Britannia Rose Studios, Trident Studio, Abbey Road Studios, or RGM Sound? I know the answer because I've been to that studio. Yes, I have. Sorry, can't help but brag a little bit. I do love my Beatles. Okay, so the correct answer, which studio? Okay, well that would be Abbey Road Studios over in London. The Beatles were part of a cultural phenomenon involving multiple rock and pop groups from the UK becoming popular in the US. What was this musical movement called? Was it the Rad Rocker Rave, the English Takeover, the boy band Frenzy, or the British Invasion? The Beatles were part of a cultural phenomenon involving multiple rock and pop groups from the UK becoming popular in the US. What was this musical movement called? Was it Rad Rocker Rave. I like that one, Rad Rocker Rave. The English Takeover, the boy band Frenzy, or the British Invasion. Now I know the answer is the British Invasion. Yeah, it is. Okay. Rad Rocker Rave. I wonder if that could be a tongue twister. Say it fast. Rad Rocker Rave, Rad Rocker Rave, Rad Rocker. Okay, another true or false here. Because of civil rights issues in the US, the Beatles had to play at segregated shows. Because of civil rights issues in the US, the Beatles had to play at segregated shows. True or false? I'm curious about that one. False. I didn't think so. That was false. What was the location of the Beatles' first live performance in the US? The location of the Beatles' first live performance in the US. Was it at the Washington, D.C. Coliseum, Madison Square Garden, Carnegie Hall, or Radio City Music Hall? Washington Coliseum, Madison Square Garden, Carnegie Hall, or Radio City Music Hall? And the answer is, drumbeat please, the Washington Coliseum. It was right here in good old Washington, D.C. Okay, next. What was the name of the newspaper publication in Liverpool that carried early stories and photos of the Beatles, along with other local bands and stars from the early 1960s? What was the name of the newspaper publication in Liverpool? They carried early stories and photos of the Beatles, along with other local bands and stars from the early 1960s. Was the publication called The Independent, The Mercy Beat, Liverpool Echo, or Band Beats? The Independent, Mercy Beat, Liverpool Echo, Band Beats. The answer, Mercy Beat. Mercy Beat is the answer. Okay, so 20 questions, and now the fun facts section, which is called Did You Know? And there's a bit of information here, several bulleted paragraphs. So let's see how much of this we actually know. Did you know on July 6th, 1957, John Lennon and Paul McCartney met for the first time at St. Peter's Church in Liverpool, England, where John's skiffle band, the Quarrymen, were performing. McCartney joined the Quarrymen, which would later become the Beatles in 1960. Now, that answered some of the questions that we had to the questions they had. The name The Beatles was derived from a play on the words beat and Beatles. The insect element is rumored to have been inspired by Buddy Holly and the Crickets. I knew that. The Liverpool publication Mercy Beat printed news about the local bands and stars performing in Merseyside County in the early 1960s. In 1962, they held a poll to determine the most popular group, and the Beatles won, of course. During their residency in Hamburg and early performances in Liverpool, the Beatles often donned black all-leather outfits, a staple in German fashion. The Beatles' UK popularity began with their performances at the Star Club. The Quarrymen made their first appearance at the club on August 7th, 1957. They first performed there as the Beatles after returning to Liverpool from a residency in Hamburg. Two nights after arriving in the US the first time, the Beatles played their first American concert at Washington Coliseum in Washington, D.C. Despite the Coliseum owner, Harry Lynn, only running one ad in the Washington Post, the concert sold out in days. The press adopted the term Beatlemania in response to scenes of hysteria and high-pitched screaming that characterized any appearance of the Beatles during their peak years. In 1977, a musical of the same name premiered on Broadway, highlighting the history of the 1960s through the music of the Beatles. During their US tour in 1964, the Beatles were scheduled to perform in a segregated venue at Jackson's Gator Bowl in Florida. They refused to perform unless the audience was integrated and included clauses in their contracts that stipulated all of their shows be integrated in subsequent tours. The mass hysteria and safety concerns at their live performances, coupled with inadequate sound equipment, caused the Beatles to halt live performances in 1966, ending 4 years of nonstop touring. They continued recording music in the studio, where they took advantage of the use of studio technology. The Beatles were mostly self-taught musicians who had never learned to read music. At first, the Beatles were mostly a guitar and drum band, but over the years, the group became accomplished with multi-instruments. While Paul McCartney's first instrument was the piano, the first that he personally owned was a nickel-plated trumpet given to him by his father. However, when rock and roll became popular, he traded this instrument for a 15-pound steel string acoustic guitar. Both Paul McCartney and George Harrison were inspired by Slim Whitman's guitar playing. For Paul, this inspiration came in the form of the idea to switch his strings around, and he began playing left-handed. George, however, simply had not seen others play the guitar before Slim Whitman. And the last one, at first, John Lennon felt that at 14, George Harrison was too young to join the group. But when Paul McCartney arranged the meeting, young George managed to impress John by performing the lead guitar part from the instrumental Raunchy. Cool, right? That was pretty good. Okay, so like we finished one whole chapter of trivia and fun facts. So next week, maybe I'll go on with chapter 2. It's about key people, in case anyone wants to brush up on their fact-finding skills or what have you. So anyway, if you want to know more about my tours, for instance, tomorrow, Bay Lady's going to the National Historical Park, Fort McHenry in Baltimore Harbor, where we'll take a tour of the fort and learn about the Battle of 1812. Let's see, what else? The War of 1812. The battle actually took place in 1814. But anyway, so that, and this, of course, Beatles trivia will be back next Wednesday at noon. Let's see what else. So if you want to keep up with my tours, you might want to friend me on Facebook, The Bay Lady, and that way you will get notices and updated information when my tours are coming up. Also, you can follow my channel on YouTube. That would be Sharon Schultz, The Bay Lady. Also, there is a link on both of those social media platforms to another platform called buymeacoffee.com. And that's where I can accept tips, donations, gratuities, whatever to fund future tours. So I hope you have a great week. And if I don't see you before, I'll see you next Wednesday. Take care. Bye. Slán.